This morning I'm reading from the New King James Version, 2 Corinthians chapter 5. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation, which is from heaven. If indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up in life. Now he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who also has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always confident, knowing that while we're at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, yes, well pleased rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Therefore, we make it our aim, whether present or absent, to be well pleasing to him. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I love these readings out of 2 Corinthians, and I hope that you might get the chance to go back over last week and pick up 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and then read forward into 5. Because, and I think I've said this a few times, you've got to get into our heads that when these words were first written, a letter from Paul to the Corinthian church, it's not written with chapters and it's not written with those nice little verses. Paul just wrote. And so it's good to follow the thoughts and the ideas from the very start right through to the conclusion. Imagine a letter that you might have written or an email that someone else in the distant future goes through and puts in little chapters and little verses. It would begin to break down the context if they just chose two of those to read out of the whole body of the piece that you've written. What a tragedy that would be. I think of some of mine. I did this to a company recently. I've written to complain about the customer service. I had a lot of other good things to say actually before that about their long years of helpfulness and generosity of spirit. I remember the day they threw me keys to a car because my other one wasn't quite ready to drive. But I had to write something because my car's been in repairs now for 6 weeks. I thought, but my point being that if you just chose a couple of verses, you might miss the huge amount of thank you for the years of your help and your concern. I'm not sure what's happened now. So I think about that with Paul and other writers a lot. It's good to see the whole rather than just fixating on one or two things, because then you can miss the rest of what's there. So just be encouraged, read over it. Those readings are great, and honestly I could not think of a better reading to reflect on with the passing of beautiful Marge. My goodness. And I've got to hold back because it's not a funeral service or a Thanksgiving service. But in the time that I've known her, I've been so grateful for who she is, even when things were drifting. So grateful for her. And some of you have known her for the long haul. And I've thought about all those little babies delivered caringly by Marge. And I remember she was in Tassie for a while, I think, too, wasn't she? And one of the things she did there was caring for young girls and women who arrived under that huge cloud of shame, expecting without a husband and having to leave their towns and their families because no one would hold them. And so they'd made that lonely journey to Tassie to deliver, absent. Then I guess adoptions and all those things that went on. And I think what a lovely soul to have met with Marge. And so the reading today talks about tents, hence why we've got the tent here this morning. Maybe if you remember nothing else, at least you remember the tent. And I don't know what experiences you've had of tents. Sometimes they're so dissatisfying you never want to do them again. But tents have their own magic. I love camping, but I haven't camped for years. Don't ask me why. I love the thing of being in a tent. And I love the thing of being out on a hot day and crawling in and seeing the light filtering through the colour through the tent and the end of a long day, getting in the sleeping bag, and it's kind of nice having a scratchy home away from home that you're never quite comfortable in. That just reminds you, I want to get back home and have a decent shower. Is that how it works? So a tent works in lots of different ways. But Paul focuses on the tent particularly to think about what it is to live in a body. And from the beginning of this, I want to say Paul is not dismissive of the human body. He's not that Greek term, he's not a dualist. It's not like the body is terrible and it's only the spirit. He is a huge lover of the body, so much so he takes the time to talk about the power of resurrection. If Jesus is resurrected and that's a body, how much more we have to look forward to with a body that fully works, the kind of body that God had in mind from the very beginning, before anything becomes diseased or difficult or breaks down. Paul does not dismiss the body, but he understands that the body is a convenient tent. We inhabit it for a period of time. And occasionally, as some of you might have found, the tent pegs go missing. It's actually, this tent was put up by Eden this morning, and we were joking when we were putting it up, because there were extra tent pegs in the bag, and he said, this is going to go bad, because there must be a tent somewhere else that's missing all this stuff. And I said, we've all had that experience. You get somewhere and you're dragged into town, or the oval or the park. Wilson's Prom is probably the worst place to end up with only half a tent. And you're setting up just as the sun's setting and it's freezing cold and the wind is whipping off Antarctica somewhere, and you realise that tent pegs are missing, it won't stand up. So all you can do is crawl into a sleeping bag and just pull this sad mess over the top of you and hope that the morning will bring some light or joy. Now, the other thing about tents too, and you might have had this experience, the last person who used it hadn't aired it or dried it out before they put it away. So I think hilariously about Paul's idea of the tent and how far you can take it. Because tents aren't always great, they're not always convenient, and they do lose things, and occasionally they leak. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good description of a human body over time, isn't it? You do lose a few tent pegs along the way, and they do get a bit saggy, and they get a bit thin, and they do leak, and sometimes they're not always convenient. Oh Lord, can I have a new tent, please? It would be really nice. So I want you to grab the delight of Paul as he writes about the tent. And I think about Marge, who's so helpful in this. A tent that has been amazing, delivering babies and caring for sad and bewildered young women, and a great strategist for medical care as well. Amazing. Palliative care and support. And yet that tent just had to be packed away, and we'll honour every living thing that tent has done. But how much more it is to say, and there is more. There is more. There is more life in Marge than met the eye. More life in Marge than her intellect. More life than what she could do. More life than her professionalism. More life than her humour, which was outrageous and amazing. More life than we can imagine, because the life of Jesus is in her. And as that tent comes to its conclusion, is packed up and put away, and all the things of Marge are taken out of a room, all those things happen, how extraordinary it is to think about the full mystery and marvel of Marge Dawson. And in the end, I think it's always personal to give great thanks for those who've gone before, and to keep focusing, as Paul has done, on let's remember who we really are. Now, to get a bit further with this reading, I want to backtrack just a little now. Chris and I were down at Phillip Island recently, and we decided we'd take just a half day for a spiritual retreat for a whole bunch of reasons. So it was a nice sunny day on the beach, and we'd both discerned some readings to focus on. And one of the readings was from John 11, and I just want to highlight some of my reflections out of this, because I think it helps with the reading today. John 11 is the raising of Lazarus. And some of you will remember that account really well. Jesus is in Jerusalem. They get word that Lazarus is unwell. The disciples are keen to go, because Lazarus and Mary and Martha, his sisters, are really good friends of the disciples and Jesus. And Jesus is not budging. He's not going anywhere. And then after a passage of time, Jesus does go to Bethany. Lazarus is gone. Jesus knows that his delay is for a reason, but nobody else does. And they are concerned, angry, and concerned that he wasn't there when he needed to be there. And when he gets to the street outside Lazarus's place, both Mary and Martha come and confront him with simple words. If you'd been here, our brother would not have died. It's bold and it's simple. If you'd only been here, Jesus. And Jesus then talks about the resurrection, and Martha responds to that. Yeah, we know that in the end of all things there's a resurrection to come. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? And it's pretty clear in the text there's a question mark whether she does. Not because she's terrible, not because she's faithless, but because her brother is dead. And she is shredded in grief, and she's not ready for some theological argument about the resurrection to come and what's going to go on. So Jesus goes then to the tomb and with simple words roll away the stone, and people are thinking, well, that is the most horrific thing I've heard. He's been dead for 3 days. Why would you do this? Come out, Lazarus. So my reflection on it is simply this. It's a mystery of presence. Jesus is present, as in he's in Jerusalem and he's not that far away, but he's not close. And then Jesus moves and he's in proximity, but he's not yet at the house and he's not at the tomb. Jesus is close to the tomb and he has tears because he looks at everyone and knows that death is terrible, and he feels the pain of everyone, so there are tears in Jesus. And then from the tears, there's a spoken word to others, remove the stone. And then from the others he moves to intimacy and speaks just to Lazarus. Lazarus, come out. And then from intimacy, Jesus speaks to restoration, is to no longer be clothed in the signs of death and passing. Remove his grave clothes. And Lazarus is then embraced as whole by the total community and by Jesus as well. I should send this around at some stage. It probably sounds confusing. What was in my mind on the beach that day for this reflection was, and this is, I think, actually why we do church, why it's good to be in proximity with each other. We can do stuff online, and that's good and helpful. We learned that last year. We can do things by email and by text. That's all good. But there's something about getting all of our bodies together, to look people in the eye and know how they really are, and to have that sense of, that invisible feeling of, I'm going to use the word Louise, but you're fine, Louise. But if I looked at Louise and thought she's smiling and she's saying I'm good, but I actually might pick up, that's not really the case. I think there's something else, because I can see it there's something about her eye, there's something about the tone. I'm picking up more than meets the eye. So I think with why it's important to do church, and what Paul is getting at to the whole Corinthian letter, is that there is more going on in us than meets the eye. The ministry of the Spirit that I talked about last week, there's something about the presence of God within us. So with Jesus, when Jesus is close by but distant, well, that's all very nice to know that Jesus' comfort might be there, but it's not actually at your house. And then Jesus might come to visit your house, but it's still distant from where the pain is, because the pain for Mary and Martha is the death of the brother. And so Jesus then goes to the tomb. So it's a progression. Jerusalem, Bethany, to the house, to the tomb. Then at the tomb, Jesus gets really close and speaks words that people have to act on, remove the stone, and then a word that only Lazarus will really fully respond to, Lazarus, get up. And then Lazarus is there. Remove all those things that remind us of his death. What's important for me is there's a huge difference between saying to someone, and I do this so many times in a week I can't believe it, my thoughts and prayers are with you. We joke about that with politicians and others from time to time. It's not meaningless, but that's like Jesus in Jerusalem. It becomes more meaningful when you translate my thoughts and prayers are with you to, and a card arrives in the mail a few days later. Or there's a knock on the door and suddenly Lynn is there saying, John, I'd heard that this had happened. I just thought I'd drop in and here's a casserole for the freezer. I can't think of a word to say, but I just thought I'd come and say, I'm so sorry that your mum died, or whatever else it is. There's a progression around the sense of presence. Being distant is okay, but there's something around getting close. And that's why I think church is really important, the getting close with those who are the witnesses to Jesus, whether they're fully aware of that or not, who can then start to share their stories, to be encouraged by each other, that the Spirit inhabiting Cliff and animating his life speaks to God's Spirit animating mine, and speaks to Leanne and to Alan And then you've suddenly got what worship and what spiritual community actually is. People who are learning enough about humility, learning enough that it's not about my tyres being pumped up, it's about how do I work with the others and their gifts, the things that God has given them, so that in this together we find something quite incredible. So the idea of the tent now begins to do something else in Paul's writing. It's the tent is a single body. My tent's going to be packed up one day. Actually spoke to someone during the week over breakfast who's a lovely theologian, he's great, and he was talking about his library at home and how hard it is to actually think about ever giving books away. I said, that's really good, let's play a game. Let's pretend you're dead. I know, it's not the world's funniest game, but it was working. I tried to live it beautifully. Let's pretend you're dead for a moment and your family have come in to look at this, and it's a big library. Looking at your library, how much do you think they keep? None. Yeah, he said, actually they've already told me, get rid of it because we're not doing nothing with it, and we don't have to take it down to Salvation Army or get it all pulped. So that's a hard thing. Now, I love books too, but he's telling me that in his tent, books have become really important. But God actually would say to him, well, books are important, but that's only for the tent now. You've got to think of your life beyond a tent full of books, or your life beyond a tent full of whatever else it is that you squeeze into your tent, because one day someone else will rummage through it and say, we'll just give the salvos a call, and even the salvos will say, no, it's just going to the tip. It's just, why would anybody keep this stuff, seriously? But for you, in the tent, it feels like life. But outside of the tent, it's just a whole pile of junk that may as well just be packed up and go off somewhere else. That's the tragedy of life, but also the humour and the fun of life, and Paul knows it. So I think in this Corinthian letter where he knows the church, the meeting church, the body of church has been divided because of the rich and the poor and the in and the out and the lovely and the beautiful and the not so beautiful and those who speak well and those who don't, and everyone's got their favourites and they don't particularly like Paul. Paul really writes this sense of, let's remember who we are. We're all passing here. And seeing that we're passing, why don't we bring our best? What an amazing thing it would be to just live the best tent life we possibly can. And realise that other people might be struggling in their tent, but I've got some stuff I can drag out of mine. Their lilo has collapsed, I've got a spare one. Their food got ruined on their stupid camp stove, but I've got a wagon load of stuff that I think they use in the space station, I'm sure we can eat up, and we can use that here. Now, there's something about the recognition of the other person's tent and what you can bring from yours. And the church is a tent. Here we are in one this morning. It doesn't look like it, but it's bricks and mortar and a roof over the top, and maybe we should have put the heating on. Maybe it's colder than I thought it was when I first arrived. But one day it gets all packed up too, as buildings do, as things move on and change and shift and things move from one space to another. This church has already had the moving of the transitionary to the permanent. But even, as Paul would say, but even the permanent is a passing kind of thing. So hold it lightly and don't get miserable about it, but instead drink in the joy and the wonder of what wonderful things are possible next when you understand that God is inside your tent. And what a fantastic thing it is to have the Lord with you and to focus on how much love can I develop from my tent to pass on to the others? How much joy, how much forgiveness. And even in this reading too, and I noticed it from the version, Lynn, I'm glad you chose that one. It was much easier than some of the others. That was the New King James, I think. It's really clear. Now, if you're only just stuck with the verses that I chose today, then you'd end with poor old Cliff and me and John and others before the throne of the Lord. And it has that sort of feeling of, and now, John Sharp, now that your other tent's been folded up, beware, because before the throne of God and you're going to be quizzed on everything. That's sort of how it looks. For everything you've done inside the tent, oh my goodness, I'm not even going to, I don't want to think about those. I've been confessing them for so long. So if I just got to the end of that reading and thought that's kind of it, you pack the tent up and now there's like this judgment scene, and a lot of us find judgment easy to believe than blessing. As I often say, that's why most of us wake up at 2 a.m. thinking about the one thing that went wrong. We don't wake up at 2 a.m. thinking, oh, I'm so excited. I've just thought of another amazing thing I got right 20 years ago. No one. We find the negative much, much easier, and it takes longer, more messages, more experiences to overcome the one negative thing than any positive thing, because they drain out fast. Don't ask me why, it's just our wiring. Psychologists have some good theories around all of that too, but that's the nature of it. So you wouldn't want to end this reading with, and now you're before the throne. It might go badly because there's stuff you never really confessed and things you just pretended about all your life, and the Lord says, well, John, you pulled the wool over all those people's eyes all those years, but I knew all the time. What a conniving rat you were. That's how it is. So you don't even have a tent now, so just on the road, off you go. No, but if you read on further, I think this is what the next part of Paul's thought is. I want to talk about reconciliation. And I want to talk about the ministry that we have that actually takes the joining together of the broken parts really seriously. And when I thought about that, I'm back to that reading from John 11 and the ministry of Jesus, which Paul is really connected with. So you think about the tents that people live in. Think about the tents that people met. The people who were really mistreated by their parents and by the religious systems around them. People who were born by someone like Marge, arrived in the world fresh-faced and wonderful, born into poverty, born into sickness, born into maybe a household where they were the 10th and the unwanted and the girl that no one wanted to see. And what that tent has to do to live and to be fed and to find, is there anywhere for me? And Jesus sees that tent. I understand, and you're a daughter of mine. I understand, and you're a son of mine. And then when you pick that up and then move it to where Paul is with our earthly tent is packed up, and now we find ourselves fully alive and fully alert in the fullness of God. It's not the judgment. I'm going to be careful about this. I'm not saying there's, I think we're best delivered when we fully understand what we've done, so we don't have cheap sorries and then just pretend we're perfect when we're not. But I think there's something powerful when God understands and says, I know why you found that addiction so hard to get rid of. Because you always felt you didn't fit. You always felt you didn't belong. You always felt that there was something more you didn't have. I'm so sorry you had to live in your tent that way with so much grief and pain. That's gone. You belong, and you are mine and I am yours, and you're home. I think these writings from Paul are really refreshing in a tired world that's full of human tents that get around. Some of them, they're never full enough with gold. They always want the more, and they're still never happy, and they always want the more. And there are tents getting around that only have the barest minimum of nothing. And we have this ministry given to us, a ministry of joy, of hope and of love, that as Paul found, it can break your heart, it can make you weep, you can get to the point of wondering, will this suffering ever stop? And yet somehow the flame of prayer and of longing and of hope and of joy, and as you've done this morning, even of laughter, can press itself into the hardest spaces. So thank you, Paul, for your writing so long ago. Thank you for having such a clear image of the tent, which I think we all can see, and knowing that it's a healthy thing, isn't it? To think, oh, I've got some limited years. So rather than being a miserable rat with them, maybe I could be generous with these years. Maybe I could let more of the eternity I feel shine out of this crummy little tent I'm inhabiting at the moment, to let more of God's hope and joy be revealed. And if you can do that, that's where Paul's mind is. Yes, it's hard. Yes, I've been stoned by stones. Yes, I've been in prison. Yes, life has been difficult. But you know what? There is a flame within me that gets me up every day, that moves me further down the road and causes me to write these words. One day the tent is packed up. But you know, life is in you. Life is in you. Let's pray, and then Mark's going to come and lead us in communion this morning. Lord God, we want to thank you for these beautiful images from Scripture. And yes, the words are often hard to tease apart because, particularly for Paul, there's a lot going on in him. So Lord, help us to find those few truthful things that help us to face our own mortality with a sense of courage, delight, humour and joy. to let these breathing years really count, to let the suitcases of our lives be full of quite remarkable things, real things and lasting things, be open-hearted things. We thank you for Paul, and we thank you for Jesus, who was the inspiration and the life inside all that Paul thought and did. And in Jesus' name we thank you. Amen. Mark.
Looking at that tent gives me nightmares. You reckon you've got a bad story about wherever it was, Wilson's Promontory? I can tell you one about the Flinders Ranges in 50-degree heat, where I had a brand new tent, never been camping before, and turned up with all the goods except the mallet to hit the pegs in with, into the ground that was harder than rock. So that's a horror story. Yeah. Never been camping since. When continuously laughs about me. It's always interesting, when you get the message from John on a Friday night or a Saturday morning or something, say, can you do communion on Sunday? You say, yep, no worries. And you say, what the heck am I going to talk about? So it's a bit like getting a call up to national service, report to Puckapunyal at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Anyway, so I've developed this technique where I just, basically get the Bible and I just let the Bible open to a certain thing and I have a look at it, and that becomes, and I try and work out whether or not I can reflect on it and make something of it. So I did that yesterday morning, and it opened up to the slaughter of Midian. And I thought, no. I actually read it. And I thought, can't quite see it. No. So I was about to close the Bible and try again. And then before I did, I just actually looked at, this is from the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers. And it made me start to reflect on the significance of numbers. Now, I'm looking around here, and I'm looking at Graham, and I'm looking at some school teachers here, and I'm looking at members of the constabulary and the pastors and high-powered executives from the quilting profession, and I'm guessing that we've got some people who are good at numbers and good at maths. So, who loves numbers? Who loves maths? Cliff does. Ray does. Yeah, good, okay, excellent. Need to get a life, you people. So let's just start with some numbers, right? So if I was to add, to say the word million, how many zeros do you add to the 1 to get to a million? 6, good. If I add another 3 noughts to that, or another 3 zeros, what do I get? Million becomes... Who is it? How much? Nearly. That's the next one. Billion. Then if I had another 3 noughts to that, you get to trillion. What's after trillion? Does anyone know? Gazillion. Sorry, who said zillion? Gazillion. Someone said zillion.
I was going to say America's deficit, but I'm not.
Yes, I was
I actually don't know what's after trillion. Didn't have enough time to research, John, but someone said zillion. Zillion's actually not a real number, I found. A zillion is 1 plus a continuous number of zeros. In other words, it goes on forever. However, there is a number for Google. Who's heard of a Google? Okay. How many noughts do you add to the 1 for a Google? Professor?
I can't remember.
Okay, you add 100. 100. How do you spell Google? Do you know how you spell Google?
I would have thought the same way.
No,
not the same.
it's not G-O-O-G-L-E, it's G-O-O-G-O-L. Google. Not that that means anything. So let's take our minds out of the stratosphere of numbers. This is just a scene setter. I'll get to the point in a minute. And let's go to Mornington. How many churches are there in Mornington? And I don't know the answer, so I haven't done the research.
Zillion.
If only. You've known that. No, seriously, serious question. How many churches are there in the township of Mornington? Does anyone know? Is there
One.
I'll guess.
1, 2, 15.
You're saying one, okay, Church of God, yeah. No, but denominations, how many?
30.
Would there be
30.
Would there be 30?
No.
Would there?
Yep.
8, 9.
8. Let's go with 8. 8 will do. Let's say there's 8 churches. How many people on average do you guess would attend church on a Sunday morning in Mornington? On average. Is it 20? Is it 30? I don't know. Have a guess. 30 will do. So you've got 8 churches by 30 is 8 3s are 24, 240 people. 240 people this morning have gathered around this table, or are gathering around this table, approximately. Now, 240 people times 52 weeks, whatever that is, 240 by 50 is whatever that is, it's over 10,000. It's over 10,000. So in a year, in Mornington, 10,000 times we are in this community gathering around a table just like this, somewhere in this community, in this neighbourhood. Does anyone know when European settlers first came to Mornington? Roughly? Roughly what year? I actually do know the answer to this one. In the 1840s. It was in the 1840s. So about 180 years ago. So just take that statistic, 10,000 times a year in Mornington, 10,000 times 180 years, and if you do the maths on that, you get to a figure that's in the trillions. It's in the trillions. The point is that there's a lot of people have been gathering around doing exactly this for a long time in this community. Now, if you extrapolate that across Victoria, does anyone know how many towns there are in Victoria? And I'll give you some guesses. I'll give you some options. 500, 1,000, or 1,385. Correct. There's 1,385 towns in Victoria. So 1,385 towns times the trillions of people, the millions of people in Mornington, get you into the trillions, into the many trillions. Take that across the world, and this is where you need Google. You need 1 plus 100 noughts and zillions. It's a lot. It's a big number. The point is this. We come here every morning, every Sunday, and we engage in this activity. My question to all of us is it a ritual, or is it something that is deeply connecting into our soul, into our hearts, and into our spirit, and into our minds? So what is it? What is it for you? Is it something we just do? Do we just go through the motions? Or is it something deeper? Now, as you're pondering the answer to that question, let me just help you to, as a bit of a thought starter, to read the words of that song called The Table. We've sung it here quite a few times. And some of the verses go like this. There is peace at the table of the Lord. There is peace at the table of the Lord. I won't worry anymore at his table. There is healing at the table of the Lord. There is healing at the table of the Lord. And I won't suffer anymore at his table. And I'm invited to the table of the Lord. I'm invited to the table of the Lord. He says, come just as you are to his table. Now how powerful is that? Come just as you are. He's not saying meet some qualifications, do some tests. Doesn't matter how many times you've come to this table, whether it's hundreds of times, thousands of times, or just once. There is no test. He says, come just as you are. And I was just reflecting on one of John's notes from a couple of months ago in what I call his editorial. And he says, the tables of God can change you forever and press what is sacred into your heart. If you have a table, you have pretty much the beginnings of all the possibilities of spiritual renewal. Friends, I suggest that we have here, around this table, all of the possibilities of spiritual renewal. So please, come just as you are. Amen.